Hello from Toronto. My name is John Kyo, and welcome to the Future of Food 10 by 10 blockchain series. In this series, I'll speak with 10 blockchain companies for 10 minutes to get their views on the key challenges in the food industry and also the key opportunities where blockchain may be beneficial. And today, I'm delighted to have with me the founder and CEO of AgriLedger, Geneviève Lavielle. Geneviève, how are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I know I'm mispronouncing that name. What would you prefer to be called?
Geneviève is great. You got
Geneviève.
it right.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, in the first minute or so, can you tell us a little bit about you and also a little bit about the company?
Sure. So I was born in Haiti, and then I grew up on the Isle of New York, the Isle of Manhattan. Then I moved over to London and spent about 4 or 5 years in London, and now I live in Jersey, and have actually started about 5 years ago. I started my company, which is around the whole idea of traceability and opportunities in the food supply chain. Um, so that's a bit about me. Former banker, studied biochemistry, studied music forever. So I'm forever curious, as they say.
Oh, that's wonderful. And so, with your curiosity, what have you seen as the key challenges that the food industry is facing today?
I think that it's more than the food industry. It's really the producers, So we all hear about all these dire messages from the World Food Program, the FAO talking about, and also World Food Program. FAO talks about how by in the next 2050 we need to change things, or we won't have enough food to feed the world. You have the World Food Program and also UNICEF and others, and speaking about what has happened with the pandemic and the fact that there isn't any food. But the reality is that there is. It's what happens in between, the waste, the loss, and all these aspects, which is really are the things that we need to fix. And being able to fix this is we need to have the data that allows us to understand where the failures are happening.
Wonderful. I think that's very important. And it reminds me of a number of years ago, I was talking to an executive VP of a food company about food loss and food waste. And his argument to me was, John, how could you lose food? So I had to explain to him the difference in food loss and food waste, and it's so important. Now, you mentioned getting to the data is critical, and absolutely. When you look at the key opportunities where blockchain may help, what do you see in that area?
Undercurrent foundation, what needs to happen, in that we are creating the ability to capture information which is trusted, not trusted because it's 100% right or it's good data from the sense that it tells you a pretty story, but it is allowing, and this is one of the things in the food industry, is that there are many participants for everything from the producer, the transformer, the transportation, the buyers, the exporter, the importer, everyone, which is looking, and this is one of these value chain, which is, so, we all talk about supply chain, but really it's about value chain. The value chain is broken. And we know the value chain is broken when we look at what happened at the beginning of the pandemic, where people didn't know where things were going to come from. And I'm also very fearful of what we're going to see after the second wave, because in the first wave, there was a reduction of outputs. Do we really know what reduction of outputs are? We're looking at what's happening in the West. We know what's happening in Russia, but are we looking at the smallholder farmer, which is responsible for 80% in Asia and Africa for what is getting on people's table, to understand what has been his plight or his ability to actually function? And that is what you can get from blockchain also, in that you can create democratization. You can have people have access. And you know what? It's one of the things that people need to be clear on. Access does not mean that you need to have a smartphone or you need to have a tablet. You just need to be able to input data based on what you do. And then that allows us to be able to make decision, to have informed, and even at the government level of those countries, for them to understand what is the production that is happening internally, what is being lost because of storm, of bad weather, and then understanding what they need to buy so that they can feed their people.
Gotcha. I want to circle back. There was a lot in that, and I will circle back to those points. You talked about many participants in the supply chain, and in fact, you said it's really a value chain conversation that we need to have, and the value chain is broken, and the pandemic has exposed some weaknesses in there. So I'll come back to the opportunities where blockchain can be beneficial in a few moments. But if I circle back to the challenges you mentioned around food loss and food waste, and I think you were hinting that we have enough food, we just don't know where it is, and we need to get access to the data. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that, about getting access to the data?
So it's access to data and also the production. What happens is that because we have too many, it's not to say we don't need intermediaries. So I am not one of those people who says you don't have any middlemen. You will have people who function and provide a service. That service needs to be compensated accordingly. What usually happens is you have individuals who are inserting themselves in a transaction in the hope of speculation and doing more. So when it comes to the food, that could be somebody who gets the grain, stores it, waits for the price to go up, doesn't make sure that the good grain is stored properly, which then results in loss. So all those factors come into play so that you know what's there. You don't have double counting, which is another big problem we'll have, and you start having better value. It's not to say that the blockchain is the only thing. You will have other factors coming in, but at least you can know that that data is there. And if it's spent or it's wasted or it's lost, you then know that it is not disposable anymore. And that really is this idea of digital twinning that we talk about. It's a digital twinning of an asset or commodity and understanding. And if now you understand the value chain or the supply chain better, you can then start doing capital injections for sustainability across the value chain. What we see normally is injection at the bottom in form of aid, injection at the top in form of trade loans, but nothing in the middle because people assume that the middle is fine. And that is really the biggest broken part.
Gotcha. And I think looking at this from a banking perspective, you can see, of course, where the big gaps are. Now, on the opportunities, maybe that's a nice entry into my question around the opportunities. That middle part around the smallholders, you mentioned around smallholders getting access to the platform, around democratizing the platform. You talked about access. Can you dig into that just a little bit more and talk about how, in the smallholder context, a blockchain can help them be more successful?
So if you think about it, we have traceability systems that exist, but they're usually put in from the top and they're capturing information. And they capture information for only the population that is going to their system for them to give to a certain number. So which means each supermarket might have their own solution, or there might be a solution which kind of works across, but because the data is actually centralized and controlled, it's not to say there's anything wrong with centralized data. But when we start talking about things such as temperature, so imagine a beef that's not supposed to be frozen is traveling through a reefer from Latin America to Europe. Reefer goes down, this 20 days journey, reefer goes down for 2 days. Temperature is higher than acceptable. You have no idea that your goods have been in that state because you get an average temperature and the average temperature is within the range. So those are things that it's not to say that the organization that owns that reefer wants to hide that information, but human nature is that the individual who's accountable or responsible for this may wish to circumvent that information versus in the blockchain, that information is available. And the good part that you can try to sell organization on is that now that reefer didn't do it maliciously. The temperature went down. The data can be shared with the insurance, which then means less people, not 4 or 5 people on all sides dealing with it. So really it's looking at what is a new way we work and what does this data enable us to do, which is to look at the difficult parts rather than looking at everything.
Gotcha. A lot tied up in that. We've just gone over the 10 minutes, so in the final 30 seconds or so, the time goes very fast to go to that. But in the final 30 seconds or so, if you were up in front of 50 CEOs of new startup food companies, what guidance would you give them?
Start looking at quality, not just quantity. Quality will drive value rather than quantity.
That's your guidance?
Yes.
Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, there you go, the founder and CEO of Agriledger, Geneviève Lavelle. And thank you so much for spending time with us this morning and sharing your wisdom and guidance.
Thank you very much.